Hello and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Invest Africa. I'm Jane VG. Dubbed as Africa's economic giants, Nigeria and South Africa account for 1/2 of sub-Saharan Africa's GDP and are potentially two of the biggest drivers of growth for the region as a whole. Their intra-regional and financial links have expanded significantly in recent years, but it is widely recognized that there is still a long road ahead in terms of achieving optimum economic integration.
During the apartheid era, Nigeria was one of the foremost supporters for the South African liberation movement. The Nigerian government had issued more than 300 passports to South Africans who were looking to go abroad. The end of apartheid in 1994 saw South African businesses supporting the immigration of professionals into South Africa, which was followed by an influx of Nigerian citizens. But the relationship between the two countries was soured by reported rapid growth in organized crime such as drug trafficking linked to Nigerian syndicates, particularly between the period 1994 and 1998. However, the biggest and most bitter strain on South Africa-Nigeria relations is economic. South Africa, known as the largest economy in Africa, gained the reputation as the go-to country for companies wanting to invest on the continent. But due to South Africa's strong trade links to Europe, the country's growth prospects remain subdued, with GDP predicted to grow below 3% this year. Nigeria, on the other hand, is forecasted to grow at a rate of more than 7%, challenging South Africa's gateway to Africa status.
South Africa, as I said, remains important, but equally West Africa, particularly Nigeria, and East Africa, really focused on Kenya in particular, are all emerging gateways. South Africa remains important because of its large diversified economy, a lot of the infrastructural support that we do have here that are really world-class in many ways. If we talk about access to financial institutions, legal services, the rule of law, accounting, reporting, etc., that's really, I think, our claim to fame there.
The two countries have proven to be each other's key trading partners on the continent. According to South Africa's Department of Trade and Industry, total trade between South Africa and Nigeria grew to almost 23 billion rand from 174 million between 1999 and 2008, accounting for nearly a quarter of South Africa's total trade on the continent in 2008. SA exports to Nigeria are mainly vehicles, aircrafts and vessels, foodstuffs and chemicals, while imports from Nigeria include mineral products, plastic products, machinery and equipment. Although South African exports to Nigeria climbed to just over 7 billion from 505 million in 2008, trade volumes have expanded significantly to $30 billion and are said to rise even higher due to Nigeria's massive oil reserves.
Right now, the trade between Nigeria and South Africa appears to be lopsided. But technically, it appears to favor Nigeria. But because the only item of trade is crude oil, while for the South Africa, they have so many companies, banks, all these other ones, doing businesses in Nigeria. We are trying to see how we can break this vicious circle of lopsidedness.
South Africa has close to 100 companies operating in Nigeria. One of the most significant transactions include the popular retail shop, Shoprite, which will be the anchor food tenant in the Abuja shopping mall. But despite this development, South Africa is still accused of having unfriendly investment laws, particularly towards Nigerian businesses and investors.
The Nigerian government has been talking to the South Africans to open up, because there appears to be a lot of obstacles on the way. That some of the Nigerian companies wishing to do business.
Nigeria and South Africa have much in common, from their global aspirations and regional dominance to their domestic challenges. And it is through solidifying their bilateral trade relations that the two countries can achieve true economic synergy. Tumisho Mahanyele, Johannesburg.
Now joining me in studio to discuss the role and relationship between South Africa and Nigeria are Yunus Suleman, Chairman of KPMG South Africa, and Diana Games, Chief Executive of Africa at Work and Honorary CEO of the South African Nigeria Chamber of Commerce. We had also invited Feluso Phillips, Chairman of the Nigeria SA Chamber of Commerce, but unfortunately his plane was delayed and he won't be joining us after all. But welcome my two guests here.
Thank you.
You have both been instrumental in setting up the two chambers of commerce. Perhaps tell us a little bit about the history of how they came about and their role and mandate. Yunus, you were in Lagos between 1998 and 2000. What was your experience there?
Well, I got there, as you said, 1998, and it was soon after the military rule, let's say, terminated, and it was a good time to start looking at how we can bridge the gap between Nigeria and South Africa. And that's where we actually started the Nigeria-South Africa Chamber of Commerce. And I think that was instrumental in really getting relationships going, because prior to that, because of the military rule and the environment between the two countries, it wasn't really a cordial, let's say, relationship at that stage. But the Chamber was a good platform to start the trade moving. And subsequently, when I returned to South Africa, we then formed the equivalent sister organization called the South African Nigeria Chamber of Commerce, which Diana has served as the honorary CEO since then.
Diana, what has your experience been with the Chamber of Commerce, and how far have we come in terms of trade?
Well, in terms of the chamber, I think we've certainly seen a lot of growth, really more in the last 2 or 3 years. I think it was quite slow to get going. There were a lot of big South African companies who formed the backbone of the chamber in the early days, and they are still, I'm pleased to say, most of them are still members. But it took a while for smaller companies to catch up. A lot is made of the sort of South African invasion, if you like, of Nigeria, but it has been really over the last few years. I think MTN was certainly a game changer for the relationship, and that was sort of 2001. But because it not only improved doing the ability to do business in Nigeria, but it also signaled that it was a market that you could do business in. But in terms of the relationship, I see it has changed a lot. There's certainly been a lot of development, good and bad. We've seen there's been quite a lot of testing times. A lot of the potential has been highlighted, and yes, there's a lot more South African companies there now than there were 10 years ago, 15 years when I first started traveling to Nigeria.
Certainly marked by different phases in the relationship in the last 10 years. We also saw in the insert there, Tamisha phrased it as there's the economic bitter strain. Would you agree that that is the case?
I think there has been ups and downs, but the fact of the matter is we need to work together. And it's about building those stronger relationships. I think when we look at what's been happening in recent times, there's been some interaction which will contribute to greater relationships being built. And I think that's fundamental in having the right platform to increase trade. If you look at the fact that we import a significant amount of our oil from Nigeria, which comprises probably 95% of the exports of Nigeria to South Africa, we could then conversely really increase our trade and exports to Nigeria and also invest in the country. And I think we found in recent times with the investment of Tiger Brands into Dangote flour and conversely companies coming into South Africa, there's need for increased trade, and I think it also boils down to trust and relationships, because there has been a skepticism in terms of trade. And I think the initial weakness that we had as South Africans is going in arrogantly thinking we know everything. But I think we've learned the hard way that has changed.
But that is a very important point, because we saw other countries are questioning South Africa's positioning itself as the gateway to the rest of Africa. Do you see this as a sort of a holistic problem in terms of political tensions, economic tensions as well, Diana?
Well, I would disagree that South Africa has particularly positioned itself as a gateway to Africa. I think it's more or less come about as a sort of an ad hoc a thing where companies chose South Africa because of the infrastructure, the fact that things worked, the lifestyle issues and so on. Mostly multinationals from America, Britain and Europe and so on. So I don't know if that's particularly the positioning that is perhaps offending other African countries. I think there are different issues. The sense of South Africa being seen as an exception in Africa, which I think South Africa itself perhaps does. I think business people have conveyed that in just what Yunus was saying about going into countries, seeing them looking a little sort of deteriorated infrastructure and so on, and thinking that we were somehow better than them and behaving that way. And also politically, I think we haven't done enough, our government hasn't done enough to court the rest of Africa. We have done some, there's been opening of new missions, there's been a couple of state visits, a handful I would argue, in the rest of Africa, compared to, for example, a Chinese head of state who will come here and go to 10 countries in a matter of 2 weeks. We haven't really positioned ourselves well in that way, in really courting Africa and in opening up to the other African countries to trade more with us and so on. But I would disagree that it's anything against Nigerians in particular. I think there's a lot of misinformation between the two, in relationship between the two countries, that in an effort to really make this relationship work have to be tackled. And one of those is, and I've heard it a lot from Nigerians, I've even heard it said at ministerial level, that South Africa has policies in place to prevent South Africans from investing in South Africa. And of course that isn't true. I mean, I think it's the same for everybody who wants to South Africa is a difficult country to invest in, I think, and if depending on, especially if you're a country like Nigeria where you don't have your output is very easily absorbed by the large market at home. And the politicians make a lot of the trade imbalance. And I think my argument is always the reason that South African companies are in Nigeria in the number that they are is because that's where the opportunity is. And that Nigerians should rather see South Africa as a resource that they can use to build their own businesses in Nigeria and elsewhere on the continent.
I mean, if we look at this broadly, there seems to be a bit of a race, and I know you're talking about misperceptions, but we have, for example, the fact that South Africa is in G20, it's on BRICS as well, and then recently, of course, the appointment of Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma as the heading up the AU. So there would seem to be a skewing of importance put onto South Africa in terms of leading the economic race for Africa. Yes.
Yeah, they talk about 2015 overtaking South Africa as the largest economy on the continent. And Nigerians in general terms are a very proud nation, and they would want to have leading roles. So, and I think that's where the two countries need to work together and make sure that recognition is given to the best people to lead whatever role there may be across the continent, so that it's best for Africa. And whether we represent the G20 as Nigeria or South Africa shouldn't actually matter, as long as we've got the best person leading the team.
Well, it seems that there needs to be a lot of work between the politicians and the business folk regarding this issue. We're going to take a short break and more on Invest Africa when we return. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Invest Africa. Still with me in studio, Yunus Suleman, Chairman of KPMG Africa, and Diana Games, Chief Executive of Africa at Work and Honorary CEO of the South African-Nigeria Chamber of Commerce. Just before the break, we were talking about the so-called skewed perception of trade, and we heard in the insert that there is this perception that trade is very imbalanced, and the gentleman actually referred to it as a vicious cycle. So just to put into perspective from an investor point of view looking into Africa, it is said that Nigeria should reach 7% of GDP contribution, as South Africa would grow at around about 3%. How does one put that in perspective in terms of which is the more viable country to invest in?
I think from a South African point of view, you're absolutely right. Our growth rate is really much lower than Nigeria, and there are huge opportunities in certain sectors. You know, I've always heard this comment made that oil was a curse for Nigeria because all the other industries were neglected. And I think one specific industry is agriculture. And you know, we have significant experience in that region. And so I think more we can help with agriculture. And
agriculture is very big for Nigeria as well. They have many government-led projects to develop areas of agriculture in communities and
and they have the right products to serve the nation in terms of food security. So it's one area where there could be development. And in addition to that, there's also a question of mining. You know, we have significant mining houses, and there needs to be more of an opportunity to invest into Nigeria in that regard. Because I think there's that imbalance, like we heard. And the thing is, it's literally on the context of oil being the biggest, call it, reason why there's an imbalance. But we've got huge potential to really export and also set up investment. Let's say Nigeria is an investment destination, whether it's in manufacturing especially, and specifically in sugar. I mean, Nigeria only produces about 3% of their sugar that they consume. And if we could export that kind of, let's call it, skill like we've got in South Africa. It'll be phenomenal for Nigeria.
So we know this, but how do we actually get to the point where these kinds of issues are being negotiated at the business level and at government level? Are these two aspects working hand in hand, Diana?
Well, we do have a binational commission between the two governments, which was set up in 1999. It's been a sort of a success in some respects, and there's some agreements that have been negotiated and so on. But on the whole, business is not really involved in that whole binational process. So I think you've got sort of two parallel tracks on the whole. You've got business looking at what the opportunities are. You've got government that is negotiating agreements. So, you know, I think business is not always aware what they are and how they would be useful. But I think we have a positive political relationship. We've got, you know, two diplomatic missions in Nigeria, and we have a lot of positive, you know, a lot of goodwill there. And I think the two governments, what I've certainly seen in the last year even, is that the governments are working a lot more at looking to see how we can work, you know, putting a lot of these problems about the skewed trade balance and things that shouldn't affect the relationship, because they are just the realities of the marketplace in many respects. But looking at how we can proactively do something about improving, you know, agriculture, as Yunus said, I think that's a key one, and developing skills. And I think South Africa has a lot to offer in terms of training and so on, both in South Africa and outside. And there's a lot of talk now about how we can be far more proactive in terms of all of those things.
What specifically is the South African-Nigeria Chamber of Commerce looking at regarding this?
Well, what we do is we sort of help to facilitate business and information. You know, we're not a cure-all and you know, we do what a chamber generally does, and we pass on advice to our members. We do a lot of networking. We interact a lot with the diplomatic missions and try and get, you know, ministers to come and talk and share information with our members and so on. And we have a lot of networking events with corporates and so on. So, but from our side, we are trying to develop more of a relationship with Nigerians coming to South Africa, or linking people directly, and seeing more interaction on that level between the sort of corporates in both countries. Even though companies are doing that on their own, we like to see it as a more symbolic thing, that we would be doing stuff that highlights our engagement with Nigeria very specifically. There aren't a lot of Nigerian companies here. There are however, a lot of Nigerian professionals here, which is a slightly different thing. But we have certainly benefited from Nigerian skills. You know, so these are things that we can build on in the relationship from the chamber side. Certainly.
Because it must be tricky. I mean, on the one hand, as we know, South Africa has a stable democracy. It has a diversified economy, and it's a very strong services sector, particularly financial services sector. On the other hand, we've seen Nigeria with a very strong oil sector. So it must be quite challenging to be able to work out a balance between the two in terms of equitably exploring equal opportunities.
I think the main point is that we both can learn from each other. And what we have done over the years as KPMG is exchange, let's call it, resources. Recently, one of our senior managers with his wife, you know, moved to Nigeria for a 2 or 3 year stint. And similarly, we encourage them to come to South Africa. So I think that encourages more diversity, which I think is very important. So I think it's about dialogue, it's about sharing knowledge, and the more we do of that, the better. I think probably what we would hope to happen in the new year after Mangawang, that the president, whoever is elected, would then travel to Nigeria, being the second largest economy on the continent. And I think that's the way to improve relations and to also improve trade.
So the tone needs to be set from the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what we need more of. More visits by both presidents and also trade ministers, and to encourage the relationship to really grow faster than where we are at the moment. I think in the past there has been greater interest in traveling more frequently, but in the appointment of Nkosazana Zuma, it's also a major plus for the African continent, because she is excellent. She is now one of the most powerful women on the continent, and she can help bridge the gap between the two countries and all the other countries in Africa.
Do you think she now does have the buy-in of Nigeria?
I would hope so. I think when we looked at the elections, there didn't seem to be that support. But I think that hopefully they've grown to accept her, and I would believe that they will accept her if they haven't already. And I think she is competent, and that's the difference. She's the right person for the job, and I think that the more time she can visit Nigeria and get to know them better, the better it will be for all of us in the continent.
If one had to break down those opportunities that exist If you had the opportunity to advise her from a business point of view, what would be your advice to her specifically, if we could break it down a little bit in terms of consensus building?
Well, I was privy to a discussion that was held recently, and what she's talking about is having specialized universities to develop the resources and develop the skills. And I think that's a very good start. And so what I would encourage is that's a great start in having what she called, let's call it a language or journalistic university in Cameroon, for example, and something else in South Africa or in East Africa. That's a great start. But I think the more time she would spend in Nigeria and other countries really where there's huge opportunity for building relationships, the better it'll be. And I think we as KPMG have given her our support to say, what can we do? Because we've got a huge footprint in Africa, and how can we support the initiatives of the AU in making that impact across the continent?
Diana, do you agree with Yunus? Is that the place to start, do you think?
Well, I think that building relationships, whatever we can do to that end, would be a very good start. I think there's been too much talk of the competition between, say, Nigeria and South Africa for things that don't even exist. For example, an extra UN seat. It also negates the idea that we should, we should have more than one African representative in the G20, for example. We're actually doing ourselves down by arguing over something that actually we should be expanding the pie rather than looking and settling for the status quo on those in that regard, because it does have implications. Nigeria is always a big power in Africa, and still is, and certainly in its region, and we are in our region, and I think that we need to look beyond the national sort of framework for opportunity and for building bridges that business can then benefit from underneath that.
From your point of view, when do you think we'll get to a stage where more Nigerian businesses will be set up in South Africa, apart from the professionals being here? I mean, we know that there are over 100 South African companies in Nigeria.
I get back to the idea that the opportunity is in Nigeria, and what you are seeing coming out of Nigeria is Nigerian multinationals who are spreading their wings certainly across West Africa and across Southern and East Africa, and certainly in terms of some of the banks, UBA, for example. So the market in West Africa alone is huge, and I think if we're trying to sort of make the numbers fit, that's not going to work. The West African market, the Nigerian market itself, is big enough to soak up almost everything you can throw at it, certainly for the foreseeable future, because of the massive underdevelopment. So I think that's not really the way I would view it. But having said that, Nigerians can come here, they can set up here. There's nothing stopping them. And I think perhaps they also see the high levels of competition here. It's not the place where you're getting high returns on your investment and so on. It's a highly competitive market. It's very structured in a way that is difficult to operate in, particularly for companies used to being in a much freer sort of environment, if you like, regulatory and otherwise. So I would say that that's, to me, is not the actual question. The question is, how can Nigerian companies grow and expand across the continent, rather than South Africa specifically? I think that gets back to that kind of looking at the competition between the two countries. All we're doing is fueling that, really, with having that, by sticking to that kind of viewpoint.
And of course, we've also got other growing countries in Africa as well. Let's look at, take Rwanda as an example. May only have a population of just over 2 million, but the economy is growing, so there's competition.
Yeah. No, I think that Nigerians want high returns. They're used to high returns. So South Africa, being a developed market, mature environment, would not give them the returns they can get from other African countries. So it's not a priority. And I think that's where the challenge is, that we need to make it attractive to get more Nigerians to invest in South Africa. And I think South African companies have increased significantly over the last 10 years.
So what are we looking at there to make things more attractive?
I think it's the rate of return, and the growth rates are not there. So it's a catch-22. With growth rates less than 3% doesn't suit Nigerians. They want much higher. They're used to 7% or above.
Hotter economies.
Yeah, hotter economies. So I think it's, when you talk about the tone at the top, I think if we get the right tone set at the top in terms of economic growth, and I think the platform being set by the National Development Plan will be a good starting point, in that we're trying to focus on the key things like education as well as the unemployment rate. And if we get that formula right,
labour policies as well.
Labour policies as well. We get that formula right, it will be much more attractive to non-South Africans to come and invest here.
Great. Thank you very much. That's all we have time for on this edition of Invest Africa. We'll be back again at the same time next week. Until then, from me, Jane VG, and my guests, it's goodbye.